Hello and welcome for all of you who are tuned in with us. This is TMH as we bring you our daily English news. Our headlines for today: the Tigray president says Ethiopian Air Force strikes on civilians in Tigray, accelerating the death of Abiy Ahmed's administration. UNICEF slams this airstrike in Ethiopia that hit a kindergarten, and the Global Society of Tigray Scholars and Professionals urgently calls for the protection of Tigrayans in the Amhara region, the Afar region, and other parts of Ethiopia. As we move on to our main updates for today, Tigray president says Ethiopian Air Force strikes in Tigray and accelerates the death of Abiy Ahmed's administration. Tigray President Debretsion has fired warning shots to Addis Ababa following Friday's airstrike in the region's capital, Ma'ala city, which left at least 7 people, mainly children, in what has triggered a global condemnation. On Friday, the Ethiopian Air Force conducted an airstrike in Ma'ala, even with an existing temporary ceasefire agreement, in a move that could further escalate the global conflict, which has left hundreds of thousands of people dead and millions more displaced. Debretsion termed the airstrike targeting children as an extension of the genocidal project. Officials reported showing that those who died were mainly children who were playing on the kids' playground at this kindergarten. The regional president insisted the attack in Ma'ala city will only accelerate the demise of Abiy Ahmed's regime. The president added, saying enemies started this extensive attack on Tigrayans on the mere assumption that the people of Tigray cannot defend themselves after a siege starving them for more than a year now. The president also said that the Ethiopian government has conducted an airstrike on Thursday in Mekoni, which is in southern region of Tigray. UNICEF slams airstrike in Ethiopia that took place on Friday, hitting this kindergarten. UNICEF on Saturday condemned an airstrike in Ethiopia's Tigray region that hit a kindergarten, killing at least 7 people, including 4 children. UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell said in a statement, with the agency strongly condemning the airstrike that took place on Friday in Ma'ala, the capital of the northern region of Tigray. Russell stressed that the children of Ethiopia are at risk once again amid the escalating violence and called on all parties to agree to an immediate cessation of hostilities. Yet again, an escalation of violence in northern Ethiopia has caused children to pay the heaviest price. For almost 2 years now, children and their families in this region have endured unimaginable agony of this conflict, and it must end immediately, she said in her statement. Friday's strike came days after fighting between government forces and Tigrayan fighters resumed in the region's southern border, putting on an end to a 5-month truce. The Ethiopian Air Force has been accused of hitting the residential area in which the kindergarten and children's playground was situated. The Tigray television, controlled by the regional authorities, quoted witnesses as saying that a kindergarten called Red Kids Paradise was hit during the raid and aired graphics images of following attack. The war on Tigray has killed hundreds of thousands of civilians already and displaced millions more, and the conflict has also pushed parts of the region into famine-like conditions. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, admits that the international's inaction to stop any of the atrocities that are continuing to take place and the impunity on Tigray. Michelle Bachelet made this remark in an interview with Al Jazeera.
Well, yes, you're right. I have heard from an academician saying that more people have died in Tigray and Ethiopia than even in Ukraine. And unfortunately, I would say the international community has not been paying as much attention as it should to Tigray or to Oroma and Afar region as well. And I'm really alarmed because after some period of time that we thought that was like peace talks, and that these issues we will come into a peace agreement and sort of a transition, a political transition that could resolve the political issue, because of course now we have dealing with military strategies, but I don't think the solution is a military solution. And unfortunately, we have seen resumption of hostilities in northern Tigray the last days. And civilians have suffered so much, and this will only exacerbate the suffering of Ethiopians already in desperate need. And as you remember, I think it's a real big number. I don't know if it's 22 million people, if I'm not wrong, who are suffering from food insecurity and the risk of famine. Mm-hmm. So really, we have implored the Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Front to work to de-escalate the situation and immediately cease hostility. But you're right. I feel that the international community stopped paying attention, and this has not been helpful. I think the international community should give more attention to the Ethiopia situation to help change the situation and stop the violence from happening.
Michelle Bachelet will finish her mandate on Wednesday, the 31st of August, as the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. One commentator said her departure is on good riddance, as she has done nothing to end or alleviate the genocidal slaughter, rape, and hunger, as well as suffering of all Tigrayans. The Global Society of Tigray Scholars and Professionals urgently calls for the protection of Tigrayans in the Amhara, Afar, and other parts of Ethiopia. GSTS issued a statement in which it expressed deep concern on recent calls for mass internment and violence against the Tigrayans. GSTS said it is deeply concerned by a recent press release from the Ethiopian government and a coordinated social media campaign criminalizing Tigrayans and their IDPs as other Tigrayan civilians in the Amhara region. We are alarmed that these calls for mass interment and violence will only once again result in attacks against the innocent civilians, as they did last year when Tigrayan civilians who were designated as a threat by similar government allegations and state-sponsored campaigns were targeted by the regional forces and vigilantes. The statement also warned and stated that the recent false claims by the Ethiopian government about a Tigrayan fifth column in Kobo and other cities working in league with the Tigray Defense Forces serves as a pretext to further detain, arrest, and kill and terrorize civilians and the Tigrayans residing outside of Tigray. This is a bold call for unrestrained actions against Tigrayans by security forces, vigilantes, and mobs based on the ethnic profiling. GSCS also has credible reports that the Ethiopian government has escalated the arrest and unlawful detention of Tigrayans in the capital of Addis Ababa. GSTS urgently called on the UN and all humanitarian organizations currently working in Ethiopia and the international community, including diplomatic missions based in Addis Ababa, to actively monitor the situation and ensure the protection of Tigrayans in the Amhara and Afar region, as well as other parts of Ethiopia as well. Ethnic profiling and subsequent detentions, forced disappearances, torture, and killings of Tigrayans has been a characteristic feature of the war on Tigray since it was launched in November of 2020. Innocent Tigrayans have been and still continue to be hunted, abducted, and imprisoned indefinitely. Reports and investigations by media have revealed the illegal rounding up of Tigrayans in Abala, also known as Shakat, who were transported to the detained in Samara under the most inhumane conditions. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have also documented the detention, torture, and starving, as well as killing of Tigrayans by the Amhara Special Forces and the illegally occupied Western Tigray, as well as arbitrarily detaining and arresting and forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and the destruction of livelihood of Tigrayans in the capital of Addis Ababa and other parts of Ethiopia. Even Tigrayans and migrants deported from Saudi Arabia have been placed in concentration camps across Addis Ababa, Samara, Awash Arba, and other remote areas. These attacks bear all the hallmarks of genocide as defined by international law, as GSCS alluded to. Member of Tigray Central Command says the Ethiopian Prime Minister has lost ground on the battlefield. Getachew Reda said on Sunday that the efforts by Abiy Ahmed's regime to capture lost ground has been futile. He said thousands of Ethiopian troops had been killed in the war, adding that the administration of Abiy Ahmed has lost more ground in the country as a sign of defeat. The Abiy Ahmed regime is making more ill-fated adventures that are costing lives of thousands of soldiers, mostly press, ganged into the army, as he said in his official Twitter account. He also said the desperate efforts by Abiy Ahmed to regain lost ground are leading to a lot more loss of more ground. Abiy cannot shoot his way out of this crisis, he added. Walaita People Liberation Movement calls on all Walaitans not to join Abiy Ahmed's genocidal project on Tigray's region and its people. The executive committee of the Walaita People's Liberation Movement released a statement on the resumption of war in Tigray. The Walaita's People Liberation Movement said it is alarmed that the hope of a negotiated settlement of the Tigray war was suddenly dashed by the resumption of conflict in the northern region of Ethiopia. It said all indications are that the humanitarian truce was broken when Ethiopian National Defense Forces stationed in southwestern Tigray shelled Tigrayan Defense Force positions around Dedebit on the 15th of August 2022. It added that the violations escalated when ENDF 2 infantry and 2 mechanized divisions launched an offensive in southern Tigray on August 24, 2022. The Walaita People's Liberation Movement denounced the Ethiopian government's belligerent actions and continued to bellicose rhetoric, which has led to the resumption of conflict again. The statement noted that the Ethiopian government refused to follow through with its promise of resuming essential public services such as telecommunications, banking, and agricultural assistance. This was an ominous sign that the discourse of peace negotiations was meant to only buy time for war preparations, it stated. It also indicated that one of the contentions issues in standing in the way of a negotiated peace is the fact that the continued occupation of Western Tigray by the Amhara forces of the Ethiopian constitution, which affirms the region as part of the Tigray regional state. Walaita People's Liberation Movement believes the goal of the current cycle than the retention of the land apart from Abiy Ahmed's promise to the Amhara political and business class as well. It added that Walaita's nation has its own legitimate cause to fight for, namely self-government, and call upon all Walaitans not to join Abiy Ahmed's genocidal war. It also urged all Ethiopians to demand a national effort to salvage the country from total collapse from what at least is left of it. Tigrayan women and girls in Vancouver, Canada, voiced the plight of their compatriots in besieged Tigray as they celebrate Ashanda. The women and girls of the Tigrayan community in Vancouver attired in a colorful traditional costumes gathered at one of the city's landmarks on Saturday, not only to showcase their culture through dance and singing, but also to voice the suffering of 7 million people of Tigray due to the nearly 2 years of genocide and siege starvation being orchestrated by the Ethiopian government and its allies. Let's watch. Dr. Tseon Takee, who's chairperson of United Tagaru Canada, said Ashanda and Tigray's cultural heritage passed down to this day through generations and is dedicating to cherishing and celebrating women. But that wasn't all. Let's take a listen.
But we are also here for another reason. So 2 years ago, the Ethiopian government started a war on the people of Tigray. So currently, our people are under siege. What that means is the Ethiopian government has blocked us off. So the people there cannot eat, they do not have electricity, they do not have banking, they cannot farm on their land, so we call it a genocide. So we are here to celebrate the women here, but remember that our women back home that has worked so hard are on the brink of death. So while you celebrate, we're going to do a nice dance, which is our traditional dance. But while you're listening, remember the word Tigray, Tigray. I encourage you to Google it, and when you do, you will find out what has been happening. And if you find it in your heart and you're on Twitter, tweet and say, open the doors to Tigray, free Tigray. There is no reason why people should be dying of starvation in 2022. It's unacceptable. Politics aside, we have to think about humanity, and that's why we're here. We miss our family back home. We want to see them, but we will remember them through our traditions here today. So thank you for listening. Please Google Tigray and hashtag Tigray genocide, hashtag free Tigray, hashtag Tigray is under attack. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tigray.
Boys and men of the Tagaru community in Canada also joined the women and girls in an open-air celebration that attracted the attention of the rest of the Vancouver residents. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.